Buenos días a todos de parte de los grupos 11 de Publicidad y Comunicación y el grupo 6 de Tecnología, Información y Comunicaciones de la Cámara de Comercio, Industrias y Agricultura de Panamá. Les damos la bienvenida a este Masterclass en Ciberseguridad con la colaboración de Harrisburg University, universidad privada sin fines de lucro que ofrece programas de licenciatura, posgrado y doctorado en los campos de la ciencia, tecnología y matemáticas y actualmente tiene una sede en la Ciudad del Saber aquí en la ciudad de Panamá. Hoy nos acompaña el profesor Andrew Hacker, experto en ciberseguridad de Harrisburg University y fundador de Thoughtful, una novedosa plataforma de inteligencia artificial que aprovecha la información autoconsciente, patentando los sistemas adaptativos complejos y el blockchain. El señor Hacker fue también jefe adjunto de seguridad de la información de la Mancomunidad de Pensilvania, donde implantó y mejoró los programas de ciberseguridad en todo el estado. Creó estrategias, normas y políticas de seguridad empresarial, mejoró la seguridad general de las aplicaciones y fue responsable de la gestión de riesgos y el cumplimiento de normativa en toda la mancomunidad. Esta actividad será dictada en inglés. Aquellos que se encuentren en la plataforma de Zoom podrán hacer sus consultas en la sección de preguntas y respuestas dentro del chat para ser respondidas al final de la presentación. Sin más, le damos la palabra al doctor y rector Kevin Huggins, rector de Harrisburg University, Latin America. Muchas gracias a todos por participar. Dr. Huggins, welcome.
Gracias, Monique. Y gracias a todos que están conectados y que están aquí presentes. Que me gustaría hacer antes de dar la palabra a nuestro presentador, Andrew Hacker, quiero darle un contexto de la universidad y ahí con ese contexto podemos empezar con la charla de señor Hacker. Entonces, Harrisburg University es una universidad, como dijo Monique, que presenta oportunidades para licenciatura, maestría y doctorado. Pero déjeme dar un poquito de contexto. La universidad, fue fundado hace 20 años, pero la razón por la cual que fue fundado era para enfrentar una escasez a largo plazo de capital humano en la área de STEM, ciencias, tecnología y matemáticas. Entonces, esa fue una colaboración entre la comunidad empresario en la área de Harrisburg, Pensilvania, y el alcalde de la misma ciudad. Entonces, con esa colaboración, fue fundado la universidad hace como 20 años. Ahora mismo, ya la universidad tiene un poco menos de 7,000 estudiantes, de más que 100 países. Es privado sin fines de lucro, como dijeron antes, y está ubicado en la capital estatal de Pensilvania. Está acreditado a nivel institucional como nivel de programa y ha sido reconocido nacionalmente por su calidad en educación. Como mencionó Mónica antes, esos son los ofertas de pregrado de la universidad. Aunque tenemos varios cursos como literatura, historia, todos los diplomas son de ciencia, tecnología y matemáticas. Igual para el nivel de maestría y el patrón sigue el nivel de doctorado. Y a nivel posgrado, maestría y doctorado, hace más que 10 años hemos seguido una modalidad de híbrido. Los estudiantes se encuentran con los profesores en línea y de unas veces durante el semestre se encuentra presencial en el campus en Harrisburg. Nosotros hacemos esto para hacer la educación más accesible para nuestros estudiantes en Pensilvania. Pero este cambio convirtió la universidad de una institución regional a una institución nacional por esta flexibilidad. Además de la educación, también estamos muy activos en la investigación. Aquí son los centros de investigación que tenemos y puedes ver la diversidad, pero todo está enfocado en STEM también, las áreas. Y la investigación está enfocada en las áreas prácticas. La práctica como la resolución de buscando soluciones prácticas. Y como tenemos esta relación tan cerca con la comunidad empresario, estamos muy enfocados y muy activo en la área de educación continua o capacitaciones, con cursos cortos, diplomados, certificados. Este programa, este equipo en la universidad es uno de los más ocupados y estamos siguiendo esta tendencia aquí en Panamá. Y hablando de Panamá, sí estamos aquí. De todas las maestrías, estamos empezando con 3, analíticas, ciberseguridad y gestión de proyectos. Y seguimos con la misma modalidad híbrido, donde se encuentran los profesores en línea, Estados Unidos, pero en vez de ir hasta Harrisburg, los estudiantes aquí en la región, Panamá, en la región, nosotros mandamos nuestros profesores desde Estados Unidos hasta acá. Se encuentran en la ciudad de Saber. ¿Y qué resulta? Los estudiantes se siguen nuestros cursos, tienen un diploma que dice Harrisburg University, no dice Harrisburg University en Latinoamérica. Ese quiere decir que puedes tener su diploma como si fueras a los Estados Unidos sin tener que salir de la región. También ofrecemos diplomados y masterclasses como hoy. Ya pronto estamos empezando, estaremos ofreciendo a nuestros doctorados. Y con eso, yo voy a pasar la palabra con este contexto al señor Hacker para que él pueda compartir un poco de ciberseguridad. Y voy a preparar la presentación. Sí. Presentación.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hola a todos.
There you go. That was Spanglish. We're going to do Spanglish today.
Yeah, sí, sí. Me llamo Andrew Hacker, and that is probably the extent of my Spanish for today.
But it was good.
So with your permission, I will continue the rest of the presentation in English.
No problem.
Thank you very much. So I am the cybersecurity expert in resident at Harrisburg University. I've been with Harrisburg University for about 7 years, and prior to being at Harrisburg University, I was the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Pennsylvania. It's actually called the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There are 2 Commonwealths in the United States, and the rest are actually states. At the state of Pennsylvania, I was responsible for all of the security policy for over 26 state agencies, several federal agencies that Pennsylvania interface with. And we were responsible for essentially 13 million citizens, their data, their records, and protecting, the things that the state knew about its citizens. So that was a very stressful job. Certainly, interfacing with that many different agencies and being responsible for such a great amount of information, a great amount of data. Everybody always asked, what are the things that keep you up at night as a cybersecurity professional? And my answer was always everything. So I am also involved. I'm the CEO of a startup that I am building through Harrisburg University called Thought AI. We are an artificial intelligence company. We are taking a completely different approach to how machine learning and artificial intelligence works. Traditional artificial intelligence sort of has, big data sets that they train machine learning models on. The traditional way of doing artificial intelligence is very static. It's not very adaptable. So what we're doing is we're actually working with technology to embed a little bit of intelligence into every piece of data. So this allows the data to actually sort of act on its own and find useful information about itself, which it can then communicate up to the people that need it. So the big question of the day is, why do we need cybersecurity? I think, So I'm going to play a short video with some clips from various different technologies. I think you will be quite interested in this.
Okay, do it. Do it. Kill the engine.
So we're killing the engine right now.
It says park sense. Actually, can't accelerate.
I stomped on the gas, but the Jeep slowed to a crawl.
It says 43 miles an hour, but I'm not going that fast.
I turned on my hazard lights, but I was still stuck in the right lane with no shoulder to escape onto.
Guys, I'm stuck on the highway.
30 seconds.
Email.com.
Jessica gets my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Shh. Oh, I'm not on there either? So I thought when we got married, he added me to the account.
His videos of not Tom Cruise have been viewed millions of times online.
We made these silly videos where it looked like Tom was doing these silly things. He was doing a magic trick. He was playing golf, eating a lollipop. And somehow people really enjoyed those and they went viral all over the world. To create something like this.
I just clicked open and I'm at the site now.
Here's what the IT guy doesn't realize. By clicking that link, he's just given David full access to his computer.
Whoa, okay, that's weird. I just hit it and it works. It seems like it's working fine now. Awesome. I don't know what you did, man, but I really appreciate the help.
Hey, no problem. That was easy.
That was it?
We're on this computer right now.
After their stunt on the highway, Chris and Charlie still wanted to show me a couple of other tricks. Below a certain speed, they can control the Jeep's steering as long as it's in reverse, pop its locks, mess with the speedometer, and, of course, disable the brakes.
Okay, hold on tight. Hold on. Oh,
He's not getting out of that.
okay, do it.
Okay, so I apologize that the video may have been a little choppy going over the network, but hopefully you were able to see some interesting things in that video. So what are the biggest takeaways from that video? So there's a couple of big things going on. One is that there is some pretty advanced technology out there. The strength of new technologies, the speed at which they are being developed, is actually a major concern for all people in the technology fields and certainly in the cybersecurity fields. The other thing too is that we're noticing that the sophistication of the attackers, the people that are trying to break into organizations, is getting extremely more sophisticated. And the fact is that even though the good guys, the cybersecurity professionals that are protecting organizations, they have access to much better technology. But the bad news about that is so do the bad guys. The other piece too that we're seeing in a broad field is that there is much more integration of the physical world and the digital world. Previously, the physical world was separate, and we might use the internet or the web to find information. But today, many of you know, everything we do is digital. We are fully connected to our phones at all times. We do all of our banking online. We call our contacts on our phone by pressing a button. So in a lot of cases, I know I don't even necessarily know all of the phone numbers of the people I'm calling, which is fine, until I lose my phone, right? And then I'm kind of in trouble there. So the fact that the digital world is kind of being integrated in with the physical world is actually a very big deal. That one part of the video with the driver was driving that car, it's a Jeep. And that car was created or was manufactured in 2015. And even at that time, 7 years ago, you could see that car was mostly digital. All of the connections for that car, the steering, the brakes, previously in an automobile, the steering wheel is actually physically connected to the wheels. The brakes are physically connected to the master cylinder that activates the brakes. In that car, and I think most all cars now, newer cars that are newer than 2015, those cars don't have those physical connections. The steering wheel actually has sensors, so it's electronics that's actually steering the car. It's electronics that actually help you break. So what happened in that video is attackers were able to actually access the computer system on that Jeep and break into it, because Jeep did not have great security on that automobile back in 2015, and they were able to take full control of that automobile. So that's extremely concerning. It's very concerning for me, you know, especially since I know how these automobiles work and this technology works. So that leads us to the importance of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is what I consider a foundational technology. And what I mean by that is that no or none of the new technologies that would exist today would be possible without cybersecurity. Because if you don't have cybersecurity, it doesn't allow you to actually do the things that you would normally do with these technologies. Certainly the banking system is a perfect example. If there was no cybersecurity, there would essentially be no modern banking system, right? Because we're not at this point dealing with physical currencies. All the currencies are digital. All transactions are digital. All interfaces with the banking system are digital. And in fact, you know, even though they represent amounts of a certain currency or an account balance in your bank, they're really just digital bits. They're ones and zeros, right? So anybody that can break into a banking system can wreak havoc on the entire banking system. One actual interesting example was several years ago, the Twitter account for the White House was hacked. So someone was able to obtain the password for the Twitter account for the White House. And then they took control of that Twitter account and they actually posted that the White House blew up, right? And that was huge, right? And at that time, and especially now in today's internet, information travels so fast and it travels globally. And what happened after people saw that Twitter post was that the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the United States flash crashed, means it dropped, you know, instantly 10%. And for those of you in the financial industry, that is a significant amount of money. That's trillions of dollars. And this all happened before anyone, you know, actually realized that it was not true, right? So that just goes to show you, you know, how powerful these technologies are, how powerful and important cybersecurity is, that if we don't have it, it's basically just chaos. The other thing to keep in mind is in the physical world, we have boundaries and we have rules. There are rules that come from the creation of the universe, things like gravity. Things like you're pretty sure if you knock on a door that your hand's not going to go right through that door, right? So there are all kinds of laws and, you know, physics that we come to rely on. The digital world, that is not the case. There are essentially no rules in the digital world. The internet, when it was created to basically transport information. And in those early days, I'm not sure if a lot of people that were involved with the creation of the internet could have envisioned how complex things are today. So they didn't build a lot of the controls and put them in place that are required for today's complex digital ecosystem. So some common themes about cybersecurity. The good thing about cybersecurity is that as a technology and as an industry, it is maturing significantly. When I first started in the industry back in the early 2000s, cybersecurity was relatively immature. And what happens with a lot of cybersecurity professionals, even still to this day, and organizations, is that they really don't understand the full impact of not having a good cybersecurity implementation. What they're essentially doing is they're rolling the dice. If there's maybe a 1 in 10 or maybe a 1 in 50 chance that an organization would be breached, a lot of executives and administrators, they're willing to roll that dice because cybersecurity is usually considered a necessary evil. Some consider it a burden, some consider it a financial drain, right? But they're not actually understanding the full impact of cybersecurity. The way things are today, and we've been basically saying this as cybersecurity professionals for the last 7 years, it's not if you get breached, but it's when you will get breached and what are you going to do when that eventuality happens, right? So sure, I mean, your percentage of actually getting breached are, you know, acceptable, let's say, but if you don't have a plan, there's really, you know, no helping your situation once you do have a breach, because, you know, things can, you know, get unruly fairly quick. Also keep in mind that cybersecurity is a continual process. It's not a point in time where, you know, you do a cybersecurity audit or you implement some technology. It's a holistic mindset where, you know, every project, every business process, how you inform your workforce needs to include some piece of cybersecurity. And keep in mind that the bad guys only really have to be one, right? Once. The good guys, the cybersecurity professionals, have to be right all the time. And the other piece to keep in mind is there are certainly many more attackers than there are defenders. You know, probably it's a ratio of about 10,000 to 1, if I had to guess. Another thing to mention too is that nothing is ever 100% secure. Certainly there may be some government agencies in the United States that have the resources to completely secure everything, but even then, it's not fully 100% secure. So really, the takeaway here is that you really do have to understand the value of the assets that you need to protect. And you also need to take a strategic approach where you surgically protect the most valuable pieces. There has been a lot of great progress in the cybersecurity industry. When I first started with the state of Pennsylvania, cybersecurity professionals we were the bad guys. People would avoid us if we were walking in the hallway. People would sort of groan and not be happy when we would come into a meeting because in some cases they always expected us to tell them something they didn't want to hear. And I dealt with about 26 chief information officers, also secretaries of agencies, the highest level. And they've got their mandates. There's laws that they have to build technologies for. They've got initiatives that they've got tens of millions of dollars that they need that are on the line to provide this technology and these services to the citizens of the state. So from their perspective, they are trying to implement these new technologies, and any hindrance or any slowdown of that progression to them is seen as a negative. So it was always a battle for us. And what we always tried to do is basically to make recommendations and to make it so that it wasn't that we were telling them what not to do, but here's how to do it better. So here's how we can help cybersecurity help enable your technology, you know, get it out and make it available, but doing it in the right way. And cybersecurity, as I said, is maturing. You know, there are a lot of old problems that I think are being taken care of. So that is a great thing. That's some good news. I think that, you know, the bad news is that technology is changing so fast, and it's always sort of a catch-up game for cybersecurity professionals and even technology professionals, you know, to keep pace with how fast technology is growing. And there is always, and there always has been, even since I started in the industry, a severe shortage of competent professionals in cybersecurity. Globally, there's probably about 1 million person shortage for expertise in these areas. So there is a huge high demand for cybersecurity professionals, and certainly we can see that in you know, the analytics about job demand. Let me talk briefly about privacy. This is a huge issue related to cybersecurity because certainly attackers and the bad guys will use everything that they can at their disposal to try to break into their target. And that includes all of the information available about maybe individuals within a certain company. So anything publicly posted on Facebook or LinkedIn or public Instagram or Twitter photos, they can use for what we call social engineering. And social engineering is crafting a message or crafting some sort of communication to that person that looks very real and part of their daily lives. And the idea is to try to trick them into clicking on some link. And you saw in that video, there were two segments there on social engineering. and how good those individuals are at it. You know, they're able to, you know, kind of talk their way into an organization by posing as someone else or providing information that looks like it's from a colleague. And the advice is, you know, I always tell everybody, never click anything in an email. I mean, that is, you know, basic bottom line cybersecurity. Just never click it unless you are extremely sure that it is from the person you think it is. And even then, it's probably a good idea to pick up the phone and call. Certainly, if you get something from your bank that says click on this, you should always look at it. It's much better to actually just, you know, go to that bank's or that company's website to do what they're asking you to do. Don't ever do it through an email. And certainly, these days, from a privacy perspective, one of the biggest offenders is something that we have in our hands every day. It's our cell phone. These devices have over 30 sensors in them. They have all of our personal information in them, and they're constantly with us. They're constantly monitoring what they're doing. And in fact, they are actually listening. Within the past 5 years, phones are actually hearing everything about the conversations that are in their range. And I'll tell you a funny story. So about 5 years before this really started getting big, my wife and I and my family were watching a movie. I don't remember the name. It was about a tidal wave or something crashing into California. And the heroes were in New York City, and they got in a helicopter and traveled out to California. And it was a very small helicopter. And my first thought was, well, that helicopter is very small. I don't think that has enough fuel in it to make it from New York to California. So I asked my wife, I said, you know, do you think, how far do you think a helicopter can travel? So we said, oh, let's check. So I picked up my phone, opened up Google, and I started typing in how far is. And the rest of the line came up, how far can a helicopter travel? I didn't even say anything about helicopter. And it wasn't certainly coincidence because I was not on Google looking to buy a helicopter, although that would be kind of neat. So what happened was Google actually heard our conversation. It did a speech to text conversion on my phone. It set the keyword helicopter travel, probably maybe distance, up to Google, to their servers in California, funny enough, processed it, and then sent that back to my search bar, right? And that all happened within a millisecond. And back then, I didn't quite believe it because it was, you know, it was kind of a pretty scary kind of thing to happen. And I told a couple people about it, and they said, oh, yeah, I doubt it. And Google and Amazon in the United States, they've got Amazon Home, and Google also has a speaker that you can tell it commands. You can say, okay, Google, you know, play me my favorite song, or even in some houses, Google, okay, Google, turn out the lights in the living room, right? And they've been criticized for, well, hey, are you guys listening to all of our conversations? And they said, no, don't worry about it. We only listen when you say, okay, Google. But in fact, in order for them to hear, okay, Google, they're already listening, right? And that criticism, even though they've kind of said they don't listen, it's been proven that they actually do. It's made the headlines. And then actually that article up there, that was from 2019. So about that point, the rest of the industry started realizing that this is in fact true. So what that means is the technology to actually understand speech, and you've seen with translation services, there are real-time translation services where you can speak into your phone and it's you know, instantly converting that to the language that you're looking to speak in. So these technologies are dangerous from a cybersecurity perspective for sure. So this is our usual word tag cloud that has a lot of interesting information, and certainly, you know, I could speak for hours about cybersecurity and some of the technology. We don't have time for that, nor I'm sure are you all interested in some of the details of cybersecurity, but there are some interesting things in that list. I mean, certainly cybercrime in general is a huge deal. Anywhere that there's value, Could be monetary value in the banking system. It could be valuable information of a corporation. It could be competitive information. There could be intellectual property. It could be information about citizens or customers. So there's value in that data. So anywhere that there's some place that an attacker can actually gain something is going to be a target for cybercrime. Another big thing that's happening these days is so-called ransomware. Somebody asked me the question yesterday, what's the difference between malware and ransomware? So malware is bad code, essentially, right? And it's any code that, once it gets into computer can, either allow attacker in. It's essentially a virus, right? So everybody's familiar with that. We've got antivirus and anti-malware software out there that helps protect your computer. So ransomware is a little bit different. Ransomware is, as its name suggests, if an attacker breaks into a company and gets or finds or gets access to some valuable set of data, what they do is they encrypt and lock that data and then basically send a message to the business owners and say, I've got your data. You need to pay me Bitcoin, cryptocurrency is the latest way they do this, or you will never get access to your data again. So this is actually, a very big concern for a lot of organizations today, because they're very scared that if this happens, it will significantly disrupt their business. And that is definitely the case. Recently, within the past 3 years in the United States, Colonial Pipeline is a huge pipeline in the United States on the East Coast that delivers refined gasoline to the whole entire East Coast. So they suffered a ransomware attack. The attackers were able to break into that company, lock up data. This was operational type data. So it was actually able to shut down that pipeline. And the significance of that cannot be understated. Mike, I kind of question why, would Colonial Pipeline allow something like this data to actually affect how the pipeline operated? But in fact, it did. And the impact was long lines at gas stations all across the eastern seaboard. Gasoline prices on the East Coast rose significantly. I forget the exact percentage, but probably doubled in price while they were working on fixing this. So what is the takeaway there? Well, certainly preparation is the most important thing. Being prepared for any kind of cybersecurity eventuality or event is extremely important. The Colonial Pipeline folks, they didn't have a plan, right? So when this data became locked up, they couldn't continue their operations because they didn't have their data backed up or copied or accessible in some other place. So some terminology to know, just to kind of give you an idea of the things that we work with cybersecurity. Obviously, we have attacks and attackers. These are the bad guys. We have defense and the defenders. These are the good guys that are helping companies resist cybersecurity attacks. So just some terminology here. A vulnerability is probably the most common thing. This is essentially a weakness in an organization that allows an attacker to get into the company. So, if it could be something on a computer that maybe Microsoft didn't fix, it could be a single person who does not have cybersecurity awareness and doesn't necessarily know the things they should or shouldn't do when they're doing their daily work. You might be familiar with phishing. Phishing is it's pH, but it's like phishing. You're basically trying to trick somebody into doing something, right? Like biting the worm with a hook in it. It's exactly what it is. You click on that link, and that person is giving away their login and their password and letting that attacker right into the company. On the defense side, many of you are familiar with, for example, two-factor authentication. So this is if I'm logging into my bank, I go to a website, I put in my username, password, and the bank says, okay, we're going to send you a text message with a PIN. This is an added security feature but it wasn't always available. A lot of people in the past had thought it was cumbersome and too much work to have to do. But in fact, almost all banks today, at least in the United States, have two-factor authentication. It's almost a requirement these days. So those are just some other terms to understand. But the big one in this whole set is the column about risk. Cybersecurity is all about managing risk. And there are lots of recommendations of ways to implement cybersecurity in your organization. There are lots of risk management frameworks, cybersecurity frameworks. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States, has a cybersecurity framework that they've published about 10 years ago that's extremely valuable and can help organizations to implement the recommendations they have to have a cybersecurity plan. And part of that preparation, if you're an executive with a large organization and you want to get started, is basically creating a cybersecurity policy. It's having a plan, right? And once you start with a plan, then you can implement all of the other pieces that you need, whether they be technology implementations, whether they be human capital and awareness programs, or just how to manage your information. So risk, a lot of organizations understand risk as it is relevant to their business, right? What is my business risk? It's I lose 10% of my customers, or the market changes and I have to increase my prices, or maybe a physical plant goes offline. That's business risk. Cybersecurity risk is sort of the same, but in a lot of cases it's very hard to quantify because you don't necessarily know what the chance is that you will get breached, and if you do, what is the impact of that breach? I can say for a lot of the organizations that have suffered major breaches in the United States, big retailers, and almost all of them have been breached at one time or another. Companies like Yahoo, Home Depot, the hardware store, Target, and this is the probably one of the most significant ones. But tens and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars of impact. There's also the idea of brand damage. So if you do suffer some breach, your brand name actually suffers. And I'll talk a little bit about Target. Their stock price after they were breached dropped about 40%. Right, so those are billions and billions of dollars. And the CEO was fired. The chief information officer was fired, and I think about half of their board was fired. So, from the cybersecurity perspective, we don't like to gloat, but we can say, we told you so, right? So we've been warning organizations, you really need to have these programs in place, because otherwise, yes, you are really, you're rolling the dice. Let's move on. Another thing that's happening with technology is, and this might be obvious to a lot of you, is that computers are getting faster. The internet's getting faster. There's more data out there. There's more devices out there. In most meeting rooms I go into, there's probably 50 or 60 devices in that room, whether they be phones, computers. There are smart TVs now. Even some of the lights in the ceiling have computers in them. And what this does is, it produces so much more information, and that's a good thing. But the fact that there's a computer inside these devices, anything that has a computer inside it can be hacked. And there's been cases, I don't have any, but some of my friends have smart refrigerators. They have smart toasters where you can actually download an image and you can print it on your toast. Some funny things come out of that. But the fact is that they have computers in them. And there was a huge breach that happened because someone was able to break into someone's home, break into their refrigerator. I don't think they did anything to the food, but they were actually able to use that as a launch point to break into a company that had their servers on Amazon, right? So it just goes to show you that as this technology advances so fast, we really have to keep up, and cybersecurity is an important piece to that. We can see that with this computational time, having a password that's less than 10 characters, they will crack instantly. Not in a 5 minutes or a day, but before you even finish typing it. And that's getting more and more severe. So just to reiterate, my recommendations, make sure you have a plan. You can't afford the risk of doing nothing. Another big thing is you must know what you need to protect, because you can't protect it if you don't understand what it is. And this applies, mostly to information. It applies to business processes. Identify and make sure you know where all of your valuable information is, whether that's big data sets or connections to, your third parties, your partners. Is it web services? Are you serving something up on the internet? And also make sure that you know what to do when you are attacked before you are attacked, right? Because once you get in that situation where you have been breached or someone's broken into your network, in a lot of cases, in most of these major breaches, the attackers were already in those companies for several years before they were found out. So, when the public knew about a so-called breach, the breach actually happened 3 years ago, let's say, and those attackers were doing all kinds of things on that network undetected and pulling, massive amounts of valuable data outside of that company. Make sure you build relationships with non-technical peers. Make sure you have your legal teams involved, your executive teams. Obviously, you need budgetary support for cybersecurity initiatives. This conversation is actually getting a lot easier these days because of all of these major breaches. Organizations are realizing the importance of cybersecurity and how critical it is. And I will reiterate that awareness is key across the board. So awareness at the executive level, awareness at the worker level, that they understand, the things they should be doing and they shouldn't be doing to avoid massive amounts of risk. So quick thing before I wrap up about cybersecurity professionals. So in the United States, probably 2 years ago, the fastest growing salaries by occupation, highest was a cybersecurity analyst, second by a data scientist, which actually makes sense because cybersecurity is protecting information and protecting data. But the fact is there's still a massive shortage of competent cybersecurity professionals, and education programs that help bring new talent into the industry is very great for us. We'd love to see that. I will say real quick, just a couple things, and then I will wrap up. Some other examples about technology, facial recognition is everywhere now. Your phone is doing it now too. Artificial intelligence is an extremely powerful technology. It's only going to get more powerful. So it certainly makes sense to start looking at how technology companies are using artificial intelligence. Your phone can recognize faces, but the other thing that's interesting about this picture is how easy it is to trick some AI technologies because they're still relatively new. Just by hanging a small picture, this person is actually able to evade detection by the camera. So if you have security cameras that rely on facial recognition, this is something to keep in mind as well. So I will wrap up and I will take any questions. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hacker. Definitely, I think part of the problem is the cybersecurity is everywhere, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que si algo nos llevamos hoy es que efectivamente el problema de seguridad no es nada más con los que manejan la parte de tecnología, que creo que esa siempre es como la idea y la percepción, que es un tema para los que manejan la parte de tecnología o los de IT, son los que se tienen que preocupar por la parte de cybersecurity, sino que al final es algo que nos afecta a todos. Todos estamos expuestos a través de efectivamente nuestros celulares, nuestras computadoras, what we do every day. We are exposed, o sea que somos todos los que tenemos que estar pendientes y anuentes a que estamos siendo o que podemos ser víctimas de un ciberataque. O sea que thank you very much for your time and your expertise and for joining us here at Cámara de Comercio. And I open the session for questions. You can do them in Spanish and I can translate, or you can do them in English. Los micrófonos están abiertos. Ah, no están abiertos. Tiene que ser por chat, perdón. Tiene que ser por chat. El de Manuel tampoco está abierto. Ay, papá. De los que están presentes, ¿alguna pregunta o duda que tengamos? ¿Comentario? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
You touch upon, I think, briefly in one of the slides, but one of the problems that I think many people faces is that with so many types of attacks, so many risks to manage, then you also have a incredibly huge number of solutions that allow you to consider, the defense. How do I defend myself?
Right.
But then the question is always, how do you organize yourself for that defense? What do you consider first? Because of course, industry is going to be different depending on the type of industry they're in.
Right.
But on your experience, how do you tackle that defense? Because it's overwhelming when you think about everything that's out there.
Right.
How do you organize yourself?
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think a lot of the frameworks do have guidelines and kind of, not that they necessarily prioritize what to do first, but as far as giving you sort of the broad picture of the things that you need to do, there are certainly a lot of guides out there from some pretty prominent organizations. So really what you're asking is the how do you eat the elephant, right? And the answer is one bite at a time, right? And really, it's not about how to tackle the whole thing. It's just get started, essentially, right? If you're an organization that doesn't have any cybersecurity in place, get started somewhere, right? At least put out a one-page document that says we are going to implement a cybersecurity initiative, right? And from there, things will grow. Your comment.
Starting by being aware.
Exactly, right. Awareness is key. And the second part of your question about, various certainly there are very capable sole source cybersecurity companies or, large companies like IBM that have technology like that. That was something that we always struggled with at the state, and in my experience in the industry was, with all these new technologies out there, and certainly, everybody's kind of offering, oh, I've got the next best thing. One thing to keep in mind, there's never any single magic bullet, right? Cybersecurity, they always say it's a layered approach, right? You can't just install one thing and it solves all your problems. You kind of have to have varied technologies in various places. And there's really no way to gauge the effectiveness of any one cybersecurity technology, right? Because it's like you said, you pointed out correctly that, each organization is different. They do things differently. They have different processes. The other piece with cybersecurity is all it takes is one weak link in the whole chain, and it can still be a problem. So that's why it's so important to kind of, have a broader approach. But certainly working with your vendors, your cybersecurity partners, it's important, and listen to their recommendations. But, just keep in mind that they're not your savior. You have to be, right? You have to start with a program internally, understand, what it is that you need, when you go to them. So does that answer your questions?
Yep, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And probably also, Professor Hacker, where are the biggest gaps? I think one of the questions here is where do you start? That's definitely being aware and understanding what you need to do inside your company. But like you said, nowadays, the telephone is with you all day, the computer is with you all day.
Right.
years ago, you had the computer at the office and then you went there, and then when you left the office, everything stayed there.
Right.
Nowadays, you carry everything with you.
Right.
Yeah.
So where are the gaps? I mean, I think probably the biggest gap would be in general awareness. I think that's what it is, because that's the lowest hanging fruit for attackers, is people that don't know that they need to watch what they're doing online, right? And yeah, certainly a huge point that, there used to be a pretty good separation between, our work and our digital, our computers and our access, right? But yeah, now you're completely correct. I mean, you take your computer home with you, there's remote workers. I mean, remote workers, that brings opens up a whole new can of worms with respect to keeping things secure, because people are taking corporate assets, they're taking corporate encryption keys home with them, and they're accessing the corporate network from their home, right? And they're connected to their home network. And like I said,
And there we have another problem, because
Yeah.
they take the computer home, but then the son uses it, the daughter uses, they use
Right,
games, they do schoolwork. Everyone uses the computer, not necessarily only the one that works for the company.
right. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the big things with cybersecurity is to keep things separate, right? If you've got, some valuable information or valuable processes, separate it up from the non-critical ones, right? Certainly, yeah, do not let your kids touch your work computers. Children are very good at finding all kinds of things on the internet, installing fun games, right? Most of the games that are on the phones, and they're all littered with attackers and malware. I think it's probably something like 60% of all of the little apps on phones have bad things in them. So yeah, I mean, separation, either, keep the kids off on some other computer. But yeah, I think, like I said, it's knowledge about cybersecurity, and the more everybody understands how important it is, I think the better we'll all be.
So it's about education. That's why we have Harrisburg University. Right, Professor Huggins? Bueno, we don't have more questions, so thank you everybody for joining us today. Un millón de gracias por acompañarnos. Les vamos a estar mandando también un resumen de la charla de hoy, les voy a estar preparando para compartirles, y la información de la universidad, por cualquier otra pregunta o duda, puedan tener el contacto directamente con ellos. O sea que un millón de gracias por acompañarnos la mañana de hoy en nombre de la camarita 11 y la camarita 6, y nos vemos la próxima. Hasta luego.